Good morning, everybody. My name is Jean Colt, as presiding member for the Outer Development Assessment Panel. I'd like to declare the meeting open and acknowledge traditional owners and pay respect to elders past and present of the land on which the meeting is being held. During the meeting, some of the panel members may refer to technical devices to assist them in considering information before them. And the meeting is being recorded and live streamed in accordance with the appropriate regulation. And once again, apologies for the late start due to technical difficulties with our IT section. Item 3 on the agenda is members on leave of absence. There are none. Item 4 is the minutes of previous meetings on the DAP website. Part B of the agenda. There's the panel and some applicants making submissions. We'll get to them in due course. However, I think we'll get the applicants and submitters now, Claire, rather than. No, I'll do the declaration of due consideration. Can all panel members indicate that they're familiar with everything on the agenda? All the documents, including the late ones that came in yesterday. Disclosures of interest, we've had none, although there is a standing declaration of interest for agenda items that may have been considered at council meetings. Can you hear me better now? Is that to include? No? Okay.
You're still very, very faint to me. I can't hear you at all.
How about other panel members? Can you hear us clearly? Yep. Sounds like it might be yours, Catherine. Okay. I'll try and speak up louder. On the agenda, we've also got under item 3.1, the application for a proposed residential aged care facility. And in accordance with standing orders, I'll invite presenters who have notionally 3 minutes, although Mr. Aladdin, I've decided to give you 5 minutes, or thereabouts. Okay, thank you. Can the presenters come forward, please? I'm not sure who's going first. Steve,
if I may, Mr. Colhouse, okay. Member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aladdin, and he does have some slides to
sorry.
enlighten.
That's all right. Now.
Good morning and thank you. I'm just going to grab this PowerPoint. Going with that to work. I'm just using the arrow keys. Is that correct?
Okay.
So just
yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, thank you again. I thought I would quickly run through, and I appreciate the extra time, presiding member, to speak today. It's important to sort of look at the context of how this project started. I don't want to labour it because I don't have a lot of time, and I appreciate the discussion today is about the key issues, and I'm happy to get to those shortly. But this is the 6th facility, residential care facility by Regent's Gardens. They are award-winning providers of residential aged care, so it's not the first project, and the other projects have received design awards. And they have operational awards, and this facility will be constructed in the same manner as their other facilities. This particular one is based upon their recent one in Scarborough, which is a multi-residential facility, and that's the trend of where aged care is going, because the capacity to locate sites of a sufficient size is very difficult now compared to what it used to be, and consequently to get the equivalent number of beds to provide the degree of services and amenities that are required, and to meet the stringent regulatory requirements that you need to achieve, then there is a relevant minimum number of beds that you need to achieve to make these facilities viable. In this particular instance, the third is going to be for dementia care, which is an incredibly important new component. A third will be for pensioners, and then the final third is for, I guess, paying customers in the sense of being private entry members. So when you see the graphic on the left-hand side, there's a significant shortfall of available accommodations. And so this is significant to accommodate that. Padbury in particular was selected because of the demographic. There's a lack of immediate facilities west of the freeway. And as I said earlier, there's a great difficulty in securing sites for this purpose and of a sufficient size that to go back to the old school way of single level developments. And this particular site was acquired directly from the council for the purpose of residential aged care, to the point where we, through our submissions on behalf of Regent's Gardens to council, we had the council specifically amend the scheme to include this as a restricted use, so it can't be used for anything but this purpose. So the use is quite clear that it's already accepted and desired. That's why the council sold it. So when we looked at the site, obviously when we came up with the design, we did a lot of pre-lodgement discussions with the council and obviously took into account the contextual position. Leichhardt Park is a great asset, and it's an asset that we want to take advantage of. Obviously, we were very conscious in our early discussions with the council about the residential and then the commercial tenancies. And so the development has been focused around responding to that context. Some of the other development constraints that we have a sewer easement running across the site. We have an easement running down the right-hand side for a bore, and then we want to retain that tree that you can see at the very front on Gibson Avenue. So that sets the level that we can't, even though there's a 6-metre drop from front to back, there are constraints about being able to sink the building into the ground. And operation, you can imagine in a care facility like a hospital, you can't have split floors. They need to be single floors where there's a common user facility at each floor. So then it was really informed by the pre-lodgement component we went through. So a key part we acknowledged was we need to maximise separation to the northern residential neighbours, which we've done. I think there's a minimum of 9 metres that we work off in terms of that arrangement. There was also a requirement to be sensitive treatments at the street. So when you see in the perspectives right at the beginning and through the plans, we've kept it at 3 levels, and it's a really nice interface. We don't have car parking. Car parking's placed underneath the building. We've got a really nice interface. We've worked the building literally around the tree. And so that was something that we took very seriously into account. When we went to the design review panel, the question of height did come up, obviously, as a first issue. And as you can see on the slide, they considered that, I can't actually read it here because I've got everyone's photos in the way, but basically they acknowledged that the height was acceptable. They acknowledged it was different to the character of the locality, but they acknowledged it was appropriate in its context. What they did say to us, however, was that they felt that the bulk and scale needed to be addressed. And that's where the focus of the discussions then occurred with the councillors. So one of the things they did suggest is one way of dealing with it. From the earlier ones, we didn't have like a mansard facility. So they talked about wrapping the upper levels into a mansard component. That's exactly what we did. We also had some of the officers make some suggestions about how they would deem some of the other modifications to take place. So some of the modifications that came out of those engagements, literally over the last 2 years, is you can see on the graphic. This is the streetscape perspective from Gibson. You can see how the mansard roof's been wrapped around there. Notwithstanding the fact that the DRP were comfortable with the height component, we have lowered the overall height by 1.7 metres. We've also modified things like the treatments to do with the balconies to provide some greater articulation, greater number of openings, so that the building does present, we think, in a very 3-dimensional way, not a 1960s series of flats or a hospital environment. It has a very residential feel, and I think we've done a really good job of how we've addressed the streetscape. And I don't think there's been any objection on that part by the DRP. I think, in fact, they've been comfortable with how the proposal has addressed the street in their feedback. Some of the other things that we did is that the mansard was wrapped around the entirety of the building, not just the fascia. And we've also taken off some of the bulk that was on the rear portion and replaced it with balcony treatment. So the back used to have buildings to the back. They've now been taken off. So particularly on the northern side where there's the residential interface, so that we have reduced the overall bulk and scale of the facility, in addition to the setback that's there. And with the mansard roof and the balcony, you can see that the upper level is quite recessed in terms of the visual appearance from the park. the final things that we're asked to do, just particularly in relation to the issue at hand, there are internal changes, which I won't go through, but the other two changes were to do with the circle on the, I don't know if you can see my mouse over here. It was the treatment, which is adjacent to where the residences, I think, finish at this point, and then there is a compensating basin that sits down here. Is that we were asked to look at this treatment so we could actually break up the facade even more, and we did that. So we've set that back, I think, at around 12 metres now, and the facade is not a hard structure. We've replaced it with glass. So we've really made a lot of effort to try and provide that articulation where it interfaces with the residential environment that's there. Colours and treatments I won't go through, but coming to the nub of it, that the process that we engage with the council has been thorough and extensive, and we've been through a number of DRP meetings. We've been through a number of individual positions with offers to the point where we had a very clear position reflected to us that indicated that if they were comfortable and that there with some additional changes that they would support that, and we did those changes, and that's what attachment 1 is of my submission. So the current recommendation of the office is really quite inconsistent with the position that's been expressed to us throughout our engagement and where we ended up through our engagement. So the issues remain the same, but the fact that we've resolved them was resolved, and it was discussed with them, and we think we've done everything reasonable to address those issues in a really considered way. Height was accepted by the DRP. The bulk and scale in the initial phases wasn't accepted by the DRP, and they left it with us to go and engage with the officers. The officers came up with specific recommendations that we adopted, and we've incorporated all of those changes where it's been appropriate to accommodate them. And one of the things that I'll just try and finish up on is the analysis of height. So there's been a lot of discussion about what the height is, and the graphic here sort of explains the comparative that I think has been used by one of the officers about you've only got a 15-metre development height next door. Well, what we've tried to do, because of the slope of the land, is you can see that we've got it at about 12 metres at the front. So we've, at the streetscape level where it's most important, we've kept the height low, and we've kept that streetscape as attractive as possible and residential as possible by placing the car parking underneath and below the level, so it's just not visible to the public. And then we've got 15 metres is positioned around the same height as where the residences are, and you can see the commercial tenancies next door are also next to residential. So the idea of 15 metres next door to residential does not seem to be objectionable from the council in this particular locality. The only part that exceeds the 15 is really towards the very back, as you can see, and that's adjacent to the compensating basin and Leichhardt Park, and it is the very top of the building. So we think the question of height, we have made what we were asked to do, which is the front and the perspective from the street appear residential and to keep it consistent with the character. We believe we've done that. We don't believe that's objected to. The one component is at the back, and I'll leave it with that, presiding member.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'll ask Mr. Lee to make his presentation now, and we'll open it up for questions of the presenters.
Yeah. Just use this just quickly.
I don't, but I'll try.
Thanks to panel members and all this staff.
It was David from Australia.
And thank you for the opportunity to be heard. We are here to respectfully and sincerely ask your assistance regarding our DA proposal and the development up to date. And the reason to do that is that because it's been a long process. We bought the land 6 years ago, and then later on, we started to submit our first real drawing actually 2 years ago, almost to the date in 2022, and then finally we put out July 2020. All we find that really beneficial. Whenever there's an issue, we actually dealt with it. Whenever there is some concern that's expressed doing that. This particular, and when we first looking at it again, which we didn't realize before, was there are two main things. First is the requirement of this original chewed tree of the area, which at the time of settlement, the tree was almost died. We have to maintain an arborist to maintain it every 2 months. That tree is actually about 5.6 meters from the boundary, the front boundary, right in the middle of the block. And the council suggests that we keep 5 meters surrounding it free of building. That means that that level cannot be altered at all with the position of the tree. The second one is, we did not know, it wasn't even drawn in the tender document or anything, but it doesn't matter. There is bore mains of 500, half a meter diameter going down along the eastern boundary from the street level to the park. And that cannot be changed very easily. It's 500 meters. So what we do is to use that bore main as the main drive, doing that, and then make the tree, the position of the tree, and we kept that, and we developed our design based on that. We were encouraged in the beginning because they were saying that as long as the height restriction is 12 meters or 3-story. So from the front, we make sure that the building will look 3-story. So what we do is 3 floors from front to the back, and then the rest of them are just the natural contour of the land. And this is where we put our car parking and doing that. So our aged care level, we design on three floors, that each floor is 36 room. That's based on actually on a roster, because a roster of the number of nurses and the number of residents. And we found that the best is multiple of 6. And this is why the number 36. And we almost have all of our facility more or less in this kind of configuration. The minimum that we found, and again, survey after survey, proved that anything smaller would not be very visible. So 3 floors of 36 level, we follow that, and everything else, the surface, the car parking, the cafeteria, the things is on the basement level. So the height restriction was brought right from the beginning. So we were aware about that. And then after we explained, we worked with them and all that, eventually they even say that we still have, I noted also that stated that the height of proposal was appropriate in this location for the use, subject to refining the bulkhead scale. So all the discussion with the officers and all that is, amongst many things, is about this bulkhead scale. Steve has enumerated there, which was a really good idea, for example, making the roof so it looks like if it's 2-story with a roof section, etc., etc. I don't want to go over that, but basically we found that working with the council officers is really beneficial, because as we go along, the design gets better. So much so that we thought in May, just last May, the last one, finally they listed the things. It's only one remaining things that they are not sure, which is about light and ventilation. The fact that the way it's designed, which we always design it that way, is almost like a 2 neighborhood like that. So they were worrying about the light and ventilation on that. At their suggestion, we actually appoint a consultant to do a modeling and to do a review. And when they did, they find it more than satisfactory. So sorry.
That's okay.
And then, so basically, so we were complete surprise when they decided to do not to support this thing. That's why we are here to ask for your help to look at this in its entirety. Now, it's just that, just to remind us again, our neighbors are on the left, full commercial section. animal hospitals, prophylactic. On the right, only 3 houses, the back of 3 houses, and then compensating basin, and then the park. So we just say that the reason why I ask you like this is few kilometers from this site, we have another facility. That facility we built around about 20 years ago. It's always full. At the moment, we just completed our book. Last year, it's 98.9% occupancy rate. So as good as full all the time. As we speak now, we got 76 on the waiting list. So, you know, if you can see a way of really looking at this thing properly, we will then be able to make a facility that will be really useful for the community, and I think even the city or the state can be proud of.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Panel members, do you have any questions of the presenters? Councillor Piggy?
Yeah, just to the original presenter, he said there was a minimum number of beds required to make it sort of financially viable. Could he tell me how many that number is and how many they will have in their entirety?
Steve,
Steve,
You can probably answer.
yeah. We have 5 facilities, and every single one of them is over 100 bed. It seems that the industry using the classification, the minimum is, you know, to be viable, 100 bed is proven to be very, very viable for us, and that's why everything we do that, and that's why we do 3 level of 36 of 108. Is that the question?
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Hill?
Yes, thank you. I just point out on slide 3 of the presentation there, I think the position of the site is actually incorrectly located. That's just a comment. Maybe you can have a look at that. But I do have questions relating to the height. And the first question is to Mr. Alading, saying your submission includes comments that in July 2022, JDRP expressly stated that the height of the proposal was appropriate for this location. And then in regard to the application submitted in July 2023, your submission states that the officers were supportive of the design presented, and in relation to height and bulk, the only area identified for modification was a central upper floor portion of the building on the north side. Please can you reconfirm these points, as this does not appear to be the view of the city officers as detailed in the RAR. Thank you.
I'm happy to reconfirm it. The reference to the DRP is a quotation. It's included in the pack of materials, which actually says what they said. And as I said in my presentation, the issue that came down from the DRP was the height was acceptable, but we want you to deal with the bulk and scale. So in other words, in the first iteration of the building, it didn't have the mansard roof, for example. So it probably did look quite blocky, and the level of articulation of the building wasn't particularly significant at that point. So the proposal you see today is quite different to perhaps what it was when it was originally submitted. So there has been modifications to the proposal on the way through. Other changes I can say, so when we were working through some of those details with the officers, there were issues that were raised with us. And as Salim said, when issues were raised, we were always available to speak to the officers, to take them on site at Scarborough. And the officers have changed on this proposal since it started. In fact, I don't think any of the original officers that started with the proposal are there any longer, except for perhaps Catherine as the manager, but I don't think Catherine necessarily had a day-to-day running of it. But in my presentation pack, there's an attachment 1. And attachment 1 was the last email, I think it was in January of this year. And that followed the last batch of discussions that we'd had with the officers about those matters to be addressed. And we addressed them. All of the changes that were asked of us at that point to finish off, if you like, what were the remaining issues were undertaken. So I can hand on heart say that what I've said to you is truthful today. And I think one of the officers that we had a final meeting after that, where it was indicated to us, and I know that without prejudice discussions, because we know there's a final tick off that needs to occur at some point. However, it was quite clear that we had addressed all the things at that particular point, and that they were comfortable at that point to recommend, I believe, in favour for the proposal. Certainly, there was nothing else expressed to us that we needed to change in the development. And it was only through a subsequent phone call where they indicated that after having the final review amongst the managers, that they had decided that they were no longer going to recommend support for the proposal, and hence that's where we are today. But attachment 1 in my document is, if you like, the last reference document from the officers. I've redacted the names. I can provide the names, but that's not important. But it's there, and it provides exactly what we're asked to do to tidy off the last remaining issues, and that's what we did do.
Okay. If I may, through the chair, ask another question.
Sure, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. So again, Mr. Aladdin, your submission indicates that the current and late position of the officers regarding bulk and scale on the southern boundary is inconsistent with advice received during initial communications and during the engagement process. Please can you elaborate on that specific point, as this does not appear to be the view of the city officers as detailed in the RAR. Thank you.
Well, again, there has been a change of officers, so the officers' positions hasn't necessarily been consistent with each other through that process. But at the very outset, the discussion was clearly based upon the fact that we had the residential interface and the streetscape. Those were the two key focuses that we were asked to specifically address, which we did address. The commercial tenancies, I don't know if you've been to site, but they, I think Salah mentioned what's contained in there. There's a veterinarian, there's a pool shop, and I think maybe a physiotherapist. It's in there as well. But all of the orientation is you probably don't have access to the car point, but the parking is on the left-hand side, or the southern side of the buildings. The buildings really don't have any interface to this site at all. There's a very small setback along their northern boundary, and at the rear of those are just, I guess, back of house infrastructure, and there's a retaining wall that's there. So they're actually positioned higher than we are by possibly a metre.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference. There is no interface. So it was quite clear in those discussions when we both met with the initial council staff that the commercial tenancy wasn't an issue for the council, for the staff at that time. I do acknowledge that changed over time, and that the consequence of that, which came out of the attachment 1, I believe, was that we provided even though there is no need for privacy at the moment, because there's no privacy to protect, there's no habitable spaces anywhere along that interface. What was agreed through that arrangement is to put these, I think they're called no neighbour landscaping. No more neighbours. It's a particular landscaping species that is particularly fast growing, and it has very good coverage, and that's what we included in the last iteration of the plans to provide that interface difference that's there. Otherwise, there's, I think, about a 3 metre setback to the building, so it's within that space that we provided the no neighbour landscaping. No more neighbour landscape.
Okay, thank you. That has answered my question. I don't have further questions, but I will just comment that 15 years ago, I used to live in Padbury, and that was my local shopping centre, so I am quite familiar with the area. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Lindsay.
Thank you for your presentation. You have actually answered the questions that, in fact, I had jotted down, or they were actually asked by the councillors or other panel members. One observation, which I'm still just trying to get through my head, though, was, Steve, you mentioned back in 2022 that the design review panel indicated it didn't have a problem with the height, and you put that in quotation marks, and I saw that in a couple of your letters, but we only got design review panel stuff that was from about 2023. So we didn't see that in writing, which I think was the observation the councillor made. Right. Was it in writing from the design review panel? It was, okay.
Yeah, provided the normal sheet.
Okay.
With the 10
objectives.
criteria.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine, because I certainly sort of observed that all the other design review panel comments were in relation to some detailed design things, and they didn't in fact appear to comment on, you know, that the height as such. So thank you for answering that question. I guess just moving on now, there is, if this was to move to a different recommendation, there is a list of possible conditions. Have you any comments to make on those at all?
It's a very quick glance. We've only just received them, but I think we have looked at them. We believe we're quite comfortable with them.
Okay. What about, if you've got them in front of you by any chance?
They're on a phone. Sorry.
I was just going to ask in particular about condition 12A. Whether that sort of works for the development. 12A and even B.
Yeah, so that's on the northern elevate. So that's communal balcony. That this communal balcony.
Yeah.
Well, we're more than 7.5 meters from the northern lot boundary.
Definitely we can make that work.
It's something that is manageable within working drawings and so forth. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's actually all from me. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just add a little bit on about it? There's a little story before. One of the questions from the panel last time, why aren't the balcony just one large one? Then we explained that actually we have experience now that people don't like to have to sit in one balcony with the whole lot. So that's why we try consciously to make the balcony private enough or small enough, but it's still connected. So you feel that you're part of the big one between that. That's all I said. So any treatment like that, we definitely can make it for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So
But, I just have a question regarding the floors and the use of those. Which floors are for what purpose? Dementia. And I think you have to allow a certain amount of, let's say, affordable units under Commonwealth regulation, or
we are, yes, thank you for the question. Right along, our format has always been, we try to look after the pensions and the not-for-profit. And then we try very hard to provide for the dementia, which is kept getting more and more needed. And then there is a second format. Our closest facility, which is we call it Lake Joondalup, but it's in City of Wanneroo, is more or less in that proportion. So to answer your question, the dementia would be 1/3, which is 1 floor.
yeah, but which floor?
On the ground floor.
Ground floor.
That's why the dementia need to have straight access. That's why we take the advantage of the pre-requirement to have that. So we put that dementia as the ground floor.
And then the second.
And then
floor
the second floor is for the pensions.
Yes.
And then the third one
is
which are kind of better value for just normal people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I may have other questions later, but if Jackie, you have questions?
Yeah, just back to Lindsay's question about potential condition 12, if we were looking at that. Part B was talking about non-accessible balconies on the southern elevation. I was just interested in your comments on that.
Unaccessible.
Or meaning,
People would not be able to go onto them. So please come here.
oh, that's okay too.
But why would you put balconies if you can't use them?
One of the most safest at doing that, sorry to say that, is to put condenser. So each condenser is on the balcony, easier to service, and it's straight onto the room. And we always make it as a standard. Every resident have a full control in their room.
Yeah.
And that looks very callous to say that, but I think, and also the feeling of having that balcony is good. But most of them are not accessible.
Okay.
In Scarborough now, some of them we locked it because of the safety reasons.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Did that answer your question, Jackie?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, panel members? Okay, I'll open up for questions to council staff if you have any. Councillor Hill?
Yes, thank you. Just one moment. I'll just get to my questions. So yes, for Ms. Temple, I have a first question through the chair. The submission from Mr. Allarding includes an email from the City of Joondalup dated 11th of January 2024. This email raises concerns regarding the height of the development, particularly on the northern boundary. Mr. Allarding has indicated that the city officers now have a current and late position regarding the building height on the southern boundary that is inconsistent with prior engagement. Please can you comment on that point? Thank you.
Thank you, through you, presiding member. And I do apologise, I'm really struggling to hear anything that's coming out of the room there in the department, but I can actually hear the other presenters quite well. So I hope that you can hear me all right. Look, in the context of that email that was provided, I guess what I would say is that's, I guess, one piece of correspondence that sits within a number of emails and telephone conversations and meetings that have been had with the applicant over the course of this application. It's our view that the issue of building height and scale, that was raised from the very, very beginning of the process, and that was raised from both the design review panel and the city officers. And in respect to the quote that the applicant has put in their presentation from the first design review meeting back in July 2022, there is a comment next to built form and scale in the notes that does state that the scale is higher than that of the surrounding area, but is considered appropriate for the proposed use and location. When you turn the page of those minutes, it goes on to say, provided that the bulk and scale is ameliorated, it has been ameliorated at the street front, but not from other views. And then in the recommendation for bulk and scale, it talks about the architectural form could also lend itself to stepping down towards the rear. So it was very, very clear from the outset that there was concerns in terms of the bulk and scale and the height of the development towards the rear. The proposal did go back to the design review panel on two further occasions to a full meeting, and I understand that the panel has only received the minutes from the latest, which was December 2023, and I apologise that the earlier minutes were not provided. I guess what I will just say to that, and I'm happy to answer any questions, was that the issue of bulk and scale using the traffic light system from the design review panel still remains as a red item. So the panel was quite firm in saying that they still felt that that matter didn't meet their design principle objective. We had discussions with the applicant during the assessment about whether it was possible for them to reduce the height, and they explained to us obviously the needs around the number of beds and the demand and those sorts of things, and so that it wasn't possible for them to do that, and you know, we acknowledge that, you know, in terms of the service that they're to deliver. And so on that basis, we took a pragmatic approach with the assessment, and we really tried to focus on what amendments may be able to be undertaken to the development to try and, I guess, address our concerns and reduce that bulk and scale. And we do acknowledge the applicant has made a number of amendments. And as Mr. Allarding pointed out in his presentation, there were a number of other issues that we had throughout the assessment. And I think through the iterations of design, we've been able to resolve a lot of those issues. And so now we've really got to focus here on the height and the scale of the development. And despite the amendments that's been done, it's the city's view that it still doesn't meet the relevant objectives of the planning framework, and it's not going to align with the intended future character of the area, which really can be drawn from the planning framework and the fact that we've got a residential R20 lots that are abutting to the north, and so they're assessed under the R codes with basically, generally 2-story dwelling sizes. This lot is coded residential R40, and so, under our policy that sets a 9-metre sort of wall height and a 12-metre height to a top of a pitched roof. And then on the southern side of the development, we've got the local centre of Padbury, which is mixed use, and that's uncoded land. But under our local planning scheme, that can be developed to R80. And in the planning framework, that sets a maximum building height of 15 metres. And so whilst this lot, when you look at the coding of it, is really, I guess, an interface between the R20 and the R80, it is proposed to be developed at a scale that is probably more consistent with the R80.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. I do have more comments or more questions, actually, if I may, to the chair.
Just keep going through the conditions.
Okay, thank you. So I'm actually looking at the traffic light system that Ms. Temple just referred to, being from the July 2023 meeting of JDAP, I think, of DRP. And if I'm correct, I'm looking at Principle 3 built form and scale, and I'm going to make the assumption that that is where concerns about height should be covered. And I do note that there is a red traffic light on that, but I don't see particular reference to height in there. So I guess I just asked Ms. Temple to comment on that as to where the concerns about height are brought forward through the traffic light system in July 2023. Thank you.
Sure, and thanks for the question. I think the minutes that you might be referring to are from December 2023.
Yes.
And in terms of that, the actual element itself doesn't specifically address it. This is where you need to go back to the beginning of the minutes under key design review comments. And there is a point in there that talks about the mansard roof for the top story does lessen the higher level building bulk. However, the DRP advises that many of the earlier concerns from design review 1 and 2 still require resolution, and they recommended that further measures to improve the architectural and landscape response to mitigate the building's impact of excessive bulk and scale in the context, and also consideration of the building's bulk concentrated on the site's southern side and potential impact on the neighbouring lot.
Okay, thank you. And then if I may, a final question through the chair. Would it be correct to say that the view of the city officers is that a 4-story proposal is not considered to be suitable at this location, but that a 3-story proposal would be suitable at this location? And if that is the case, why was this point seemingly not discussed and resolved during the JDRP engagement process? Thank you.
Yeah, look, thank you for the question. I think with the design review panel process, the panel's role is there to consider the application or the design that's been put in front of them and to make some recommendations. And so I can't comment as to why the panel did or did not raise those particular issues with them. As I mentioned when I spoke earlier, we did have a conversation with the applicant during our assessment, and they made it clear that they weren't in a position to be able to drop a story, essentially, just because of the number of rooms that they need. And so, with that in mind, we continued our assessment and I guess tried to really focus on elements that we thought may be able to reduce and mitigate the impact of the height and the scale. Now, I've just lost my train of thought. I'm really sorry. Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of your question again?
Yeah, I'll just go back to it. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, thanks.
So the question was whether, it looks like the city officers consider 4 stories to be unsuitable and 3 stories to be suitable? And if that is the case, why was that point seemingly not discussed and resolved during the JDRP engagement?
Yeah, look, and sorry about that, and thanks for repeating that for me. In response to your question around that we seem to think 3 stories is acceptable, I guess it's not necessarily going to be drawn on the number of stories and that sort of thing, but it really is looking at the development as a whole. And so the development presents quite well as you look at it from Gibson Avenue, and it's 3 stories from there, and then obviously goes back into 4 stories. 4 stories, we might be able to get to a point where 4 stories is okay, but I would expect that would involve some setbacks on the upper floor to try and mitigate that bulk further, because certainly as you look at it from the southern side, it's quite a big building. And so to try and mitigate the scale of that, the only way you're going to do that is either through having some more articulation and sort of, cutouts in the walls, or by stepping back the top floor. But by stepping back the top floor, that would then impact the yield that the applicant can achieve in terms of the room numbers. And so then they're not going to be able to make that stack up in terms of what they need to offer the service.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. As you gather, most of my questions have been about the height, which I think seems to be a very important point in this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, you have a question too? Councillor Vivian?
Yeah, is it okay to direct this question back to the proponent now we've heard from the city officer?
Sure, you can do.
The question is about the 4th story. You said that would be more elderly people who were able, and my assumption is, I'm a registered nurse, will not need nursing care. So your 6-to-1 ratio doesn't, in my idea, stack up for that floor. So my question is, on the southern side, that area faces over residential buildings, and that's where my concern of the 4th story is. If you're not requiring nursing care to that side, then how is it not financially viable to remove the 4th story from that side but keep it to the commercial?
Can I answer that? Actually, we are not interfacing with any residential block, there are only 3 residential blocks. That the back of it is part of our boundary into our drive, and that's on the northern part. No, on the side.
On the northern
side. Yes.
The southern side's the
So
commercial.
the southern part is just is commercial, and then on the eastern part is the park. Most of that is opening up onto the park. Now, with regard to the 6-to-1, we really put it this way: our previous development in Scarborough is almost the opposite. Our land is actually dropped from one end to another, also by 6 meters, but along the road. But this one here is actually dropped 6 meters, but from front to back. So what happened there is that the way we think is that this is quite neat in a way that if we can get our operational thing on the three floors, and then below it, that's why we bring the entry to the center of the building. This also took a long time to convince the design review panel, and to say, they keep saying that why not the entry from the street? And anyway, that's a long story, but we finally managed to explain to them that it's really much more sensible, and this is the best way to do that. So what we're thinking of is actually, we got some criteria, distant to the dining room, for example, or availability of common area. If you look at the drawing, we have really ample common area. We got the common area for the whole floor, which is in the middle, and each section or each part of the floor would have balcony, so to speak. So, the eastern side will have their own balcony, the western side will have its own balcony. Now, we found that this is really sensible doing that, particularly at night. Regent's Garden Group there's never ever not having RN 24/7. We always have 24/7 RN in every of our facility since 30 years ago. So what we do is always make sure that there is accessibility or continuity. So at night we'll have, say, 2 RN that can look after 3 floors. And that's why it, the symmetricality and the 1 in 6 is better rather than working like other colleagues, 1 to 7.1 and 7.3. We just don't believe in that. So we believe in 1 in 6, and I think this layout allows us to do that.
Can I just add also, if there's any clarification that's needed about what the top floor entails, all of the floors require aged care. There's no independent living units on the top floor, if that was misconstrued in anything I might have said, but they are all care floors. The top residents are, I guess, what you pay full paying care residents as opposed to pensioners or those who are affected by dementia. So they still require care in the same level as what the pensioners require, but obviously they're full paying beds as opposed to pensioner beds. Yeah. So that's just to clarify that. Yeah. Yes.
Councillor?
And just on that 4th level, you keep comparing to other sites like in Joondalup. Those areas have much taller, generally speaking, residential homes. The residential homes around that area, like discussed by the city, are R20 and sometimes multi-story, but these residential blocks right next door to this site, they are single-story blocks where their backyards back onto the site. The 4th story overlooking that, to me, doesn't fit in with the feeling or the behaviour of that area. And I don't think it's comparable to Joondalup and other places that you've compared it to. Can you make comment on that?
Yeah, perhaps I'll start with that. That was one of the concerns that the officers raised early on in the piece, and there has been, if you like, an iteration of the discussions about, well, contextually, how does this fit in? So this particular facility is very similar and modelled on the same principles as the Scarborough facility. And we took the officers to the Scarborough facility, and one of the things that was raised by Catherine earlier was the question of landscaping. There's been a lot of criticism of landscaping. I'm not quite sure why, because the facilities that they have got really good landscaping, and it's the same landscape, and it's going to be the same principle here. But one of the other things that we took them to see at the facility was the context of the neighbourhood, because the neighbours at Scarborough are also single level right behind, also adjacent, to get a sense of how does this contextually fit in with Scarborough. The coding, I will say, is higher, but the lands is already developed, and often they're developed with a bit similar. In fact, what you see on the southern side of the commercial centre, so they're units, but they're all single level units. So the context of the height and scale is not dissimilar. It's not exact, but it's not dissimilar in the sense of what's immediately adjoining the facility there, particularly on the eastern side, where it's the residential zoned portion. I think there's a commercial and a water corp one on, as we get close to Scarborough Road, is all single story, and it's also immediately adjoining. So contextually, we felt that that was important for the officers to see, and at that point, that's where we came down to them acknowledging, with the changes to the mansard, the removing the bulk at the back, because I know Catherine mentioned where the design review panel were left. That's what predicated the fact that we made further changes to what the design review panel said, to remove some of the upper level bulk at the back corner, the north, I think it's the northwest corner, so that we could mitigate some more of that bulk a little bit further. So there has been an iterative process, and the office at that time, after seeing the facility, both for its landscaping and for its context in relation to other residences, did express to us that with those changes, they were comfortable with the proposal. And there were other things that came up that were internal, and that's fine, and I'm happy to go through them if they're important, but that hasn't been the reason for any of the concerns today. We did address them. We did a sustainability report and all sorts of other things, internal changes as well, to try and address some of the concerns that were raised through that DRP process. So it wasn't left and ignored what was said in 2022 by the DRP. There has been a long process of modifying the proposal to address all of those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher, do you have any further questions? No? Okay, any other panel members got questions? Yes, Jackie?
I'm not sure whether the applicant or the city, but I'm just interested in the original rezoning process and whether there was any sort of plans or any sort of discussion regarding height and the application of the R40, so just from a historical sort of, to actually put this, like if the city has sold the property to the developer for this purpose, what that was all envisaged back at that point in time.
Catherine, could you answer that, please?
Yeah, look, I can certainly answer some of that in part in terms of when the land was sold. That happened before my time, and I don't have the details of those arrangements. But so my understanding of this site is, back when the city had its district planning scheme number 2, the site had restricted uses for aged and dependent persons' dwellings. When the city was in the process of preparing its now local planning scheme number 3, I believe through Mr. Allarding's office, that there was a submission and a request made to add an additional restrictive use on the site for a residential aged care facility. And so that is how that restricted use came to be sitting there in the scheme. In terms of development standards, there was, and I did have a bit of a look back in our historical notes and reports, and there was no comment there in terms of the development standards that were associated with that use. And so the site was residential R40 under District Planning Scheme 2, and it stayed at residential R40 under Local Planning Scheme number 3. So it appears that there was no specific discussion around the built form elements and what might eventuate out of that additional restricted use.
Thank you. Was that just quickly? Can you confirm that?
It's really about one word. We were actually invited to tender.
Yes.
So we thought, well, maybe because we Regent's Garden, so we assume that that land is also for residential care. And then when we, just before we put it in, one of the architects from our office did ring the council asking clarification, and I think there could be a misunderstanding there. So they keep saying the aged person dwelling with aged care residences. So when they ask, is it suitable for aged care residences?
But there was no mention of building height restriction or anything. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. That answers the question.
Yeah.
All right. Further questions? Anybody? If not, we'll move on. Thank you for the presentation. We'll move on to the agenda, which does have the item. In order that we as a panel can move into discussion on it, may I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation that is in the responsible authority report? Councillor Hill, you're moving.
Yes, I'm happy to move for the purpose of commencing the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? No, for want of a seconder, the
I can second it, but last time I tried to do that and I didn't agree, you said I wasn't allowed to do that. So I'm happy to second, but I'm not agreeing to what's there.
Well, okay, I think that's...
Well, if this one lapses, then you have the opportunity to move the alternate.
Yes,
motion,
okay.
Discussion can happen then.
All right, okay. If it's carried, then you can vote on it later. All right, well, we'll have a seconder. Councillor Pizzi, thank you. Councillor Hill, would you like to speak to your motion, please?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Yes, so as I say, I'm moving this motion so that we can commence the debate. So my general view on matters such as this is that we do need more of this kind of facility within our city. I'm familiar with another project that was recently opened about a year ago, which is another excellent facility by a reputable operator. And I have taken the time just to check on the details of that one. It's a 3-story, which borders on a commercial and a residential, but it has 96 beds. So I think that supports the view from the proponent in that that's the kind of scale of number of beds that's required for to make a facility of this nature and quality viable. I'm also inclined, well, I also note the comments in there from the proponent regarding that sort of scale providing affordability to residents as well. So I do think it's important to have facilities of this nature at locations throughout our city so that people can generally live in the area and live close to relatives, etc. So and also creates jobs for our local communities. So I think that's all well and good. We are also quite short of new development areas for locating facilities. So obviously, in the absence of knocking down other commercial buildings to build something like this, then there's not that many places available. So I'm interested to hear the views of the other panel members on the recommendation before us prior to determining my vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pizzey.
Yeah, so completely think this is a great spot for a aged care residential facility. It's right near medical centre, commercial precinct. It's really important that City Joondalup residents have access to these kind of facilities and they can move into them without moving away from their areas. So I support a residential care facility completely. And this particular facility looks amazing in what they can offer. And as a registered nurse, I was very impressed with it. My concern comes at the residential side, the northern side, and the 4th story. And I don't particularly have concern over a 4th story over the commercial side. I think that fits in. It's overlooking residential balconies, and like Adrian said, there's historical other residential facilities that have been done in the area that are 3 stories at 96 rooms that is financially viable to that company. And I think that kind of facility would work better in this area. That is, a step between R20 and the commercial precinct, which then increases your ability to go higher. So that's, I am open to listening to further discussion, but that is my concern, is the 4th story overlooking people's homes.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Other panel members, do you wish to speak to the item or against the recommendation? Jackie.
I would be speaking against the recommendation. I think that it is a good facility. I do understand the officer's concerns about bulk and scale. However, I do feel that the alternate recommendation does address those concerns, and that it does meet the planning framework for the area.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Yes, I guess I will speak against the recommendation and for an alternative. Firstly, thank you to the City of Joondalup officers for the comprehensive responsible authority report. Also to the applicants for their willingness to address certain design issues and arising from the proposed development and their presentation today. My first inclination upon reading the responsible authority report was to support the city's recommendation to uphold the principles of the local planning policy, non-residential development in the residential zone. The policy and the table at clause 4.2 attempt to ensure that certain height limits are complied with height being the main determinant of bulk and scale in order to harmonise with the future desired character of the locality. The provisions of the residential design codes can't be applied to a residential care facility. So a number of local governments have developed local planning policies and also use state planning policy in order to ensure a high standard for new development, which is inserting itself into the urban environment. Which brings me to the suburb of Padbury. This is a very low density suburb, which from my recollection was developed about 50 years ago in the 1970s, when block size was king and houses had the latest design features of sunken living rooms and shag pile carpet. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. We all know now that it's not just the inner city and the inner suburbs which need to broaden their horizons and accommodate high densities and a different range of land uses, but that the middle ring and outer suburbs need to as well. So it's not unexpected that development, like what is before the panel today, will start to materialise, and this is consistent with the ascribed density and one of the designated uses for the site, and with the aspirations of the City of Joondalup's housing strategy. So having regard to that, I'm very comfortable with the land use. With regard to the considerable discretion which would need to be granted to the height and setbacks of the building, I'm a bit less comfortable. However, applying a balanced and considered approach to the proposed development, it has a number of areas of assessment in its favour, including compliance with car parking, high quality landscaping, which is well over the minimum requirement, the retention of a mature tree at the front, at the street frontage, the proposed colours and materials, the mansard roof and window features, the spaces around the building and within the floors, and its site-specific location abutting non-residential development on 3 sides and being in very close proximity to a local neighbourhood centre. The city's local planning policy probably assumes a level site with regard to building height, or at least the height being assessed from natural or average ground level. But this development has responded to the site value by having a 3-storey appearance from this street, Gibson Avenue, with the higher elevations abutting the commercial development to the south and the park to the north. The access way sets it back from the R20 coded single residential development to the east. It is a big and bulky development, there's no doubt about that. But in my view, it's not fatal to the streetscape or its immediate surrounds because of the high quality of the design and the landscaping. In addition, it's on a very large site, just over 5,000 square metres. So it's inevitable that it would be a building which sought to maximise site cover. It's also apparent that there is some need for economy of scale with regard to the number of rooms and the facilities that are provided. I'm acutely conscious that allowing substantial variation to the standards and provisions, and also noting the objections to the development, there will be some impacts, and the applicant and operator should not lose sight of that fact. I think with regard to when working drawings are prepared, there is a scope and opportunity for this building to even be tweaked a little bit further, and some of the conditions comply with that. And I would encourage both the city and the applicant to work together to resolve those issues if this was to move to an approval. Does the development comply with the strategic objectives for the site? Yes. Does the development comply with the statutory objectives and provisions for the site? Well, yes and no. But to quote Voltaire, the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. For those reasons, I'm prepared to support an alternative recommendation to approve the application. Thank you. Sorry,
Thank you. Do we move the alternative recommendation now? Or okay. All right. Well, Lindsay, I think, has encapsulated my view as well. I think that I'm familiar with the locality, like Councillor Hill. I also lived in Padbury for a while, although it was in the late 1970s when it was being developed. However, family do live in that area, and we visit the suburb quite a lot and stop in at the Warburton Avenue Shopping Centre regularly, and I'm familiar with the locality and its surroundings. The fact that it was developed a long time ago, it is very much a 1970s history to its residential character with single residence, single level residence. However, driving through the suburb recently, I was surprised at the number of lots that are being re-subdivided with 2 level dwellings with in fact, some of the residences I've seen there equate to almost a 3-level development. I think that the history of the site and the locality once again demonstrates that it's very much in transition. In fact, the Responsible Authority report mentions that, and it's changing its nature because it is so close to the city centre. And I think the expectation is in today's world, the shopping centre wouldn't have been developed like it is, and it probably coming up for a redevelopment itself, as is the medical centre and all supplies area next door. Most aged care residential developments that are being developed now are for multi-level sites. The Rosewood Care Group in West Perth, I think, is 5 stories. Brightwater in Inglewood is 4 levels. And Regents in Scarborough has been developed with, I think it's 4 levels as well. 3 levels or 4?
3.5.
3.5. It's okay. This particular development is, the proponents have undertaken a long consultative process on this and made a number of changes, and I think that they present visually as a good visual amenity. I'm sure the internal workings are appropriate, and of course the breakdown of the site into dementia, pensioner and private site, units are in fact commendable. I too was concerned about the building height and scale, but I was swayed in the fact that 3.5 frontages to this site are non-residential. There's a sump, public open space, commercial development and the street frontage. So to that extent, I think that the 3 dwellings that back onto it have been protected in some way with the driveway down the side and changes to the balconies that are on the northern side of the building. I think it's a high quality development. I think the open balconies support particularly towards the adjoining open space, support the view that it's appropriate for that overlooking, and not to lose sight of the fact that the public consultation, although by a minor amount, supported the proposal. Therefore, I consider that the proponents have adequately addressed the design review panel's advice, and I'll be supporting an alternative recommendation for approval. Thank you. So with that, I'll pass over to Councillor Hill to close debate or wrap up on the current recommendation, current motion to refuse.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So, as I stated from the outset here, I was moving the motion to commence the debate, and I think it's been a good debate. My main issue with this proposal is, of course, the height. There's been at least 2 years of discussions between the proponent and the city regarding height, and modifications have been made. There is a long list of pros to go with a short list of cons for this development. So my overall feeling is to not support the recommendation, but to support the alternative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that being the case, I'll put the recommendation for refusal and with the reasons stated. All those in favour? Against? It's unanimous against. Okay, we do have an alternate recommendation with suggested conditions. Do we have a mover for the alternate recommendations? Lindsay Baxter. A seconder? Jackie German. Lindsay, you've spoke a lot about it, and do you wish to elaborate on that?
I don't. I think I've encapsulated my position on it, so I'm prepared to put the alternative recommendation for approval with conditions.
Okay, I would just at this stage like to canvass with Catherine a couple of conditions that were mentioned in the responsible authority report. Should the alternative motion, the alternative recommendation for approval be moved, and one of them is There was mention of a condition regarding the retention of the existing nominated tree and should it be monitored. Do you think that that's required, or can that be encapsulated in approval of the landscaping plan? We're just talking about the existing tree that the comment said that should the application be supported, a condition to maintain and monitor and replace, if required, the nominated tree on the Gibson Avenue frontage.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Look, we're pretty comfortable that that can be captured through the landscaping plan, and the approved plans do show that tree as being retained. So I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Okay, and in addition, there was mention about, should the application be supported, a requirement for a parking management plan. I don't have that wording, I don't know.
Okay, sorry, just let me have a quick look at that.
Get to it. Land use under the heading. Park.
Yeah, sorry, that's probably something that should have been included in there as a condition. And so if the panel is comfortable in just another condition on there just for a parking management plan that outlines the allocation of parking bays for visitors, residents and staff, and that sort of information to be provided and approved by the city prior to commencement of the use.
Okay, the wording was, it's considered that the car parking provided on site, accompanied by an appropriate parking management plan, is appropriate to service the development.
Thank you.
That's generally a standard condition these days on application on developments. So do you have a wording, standard wording on that, Catherine?
We probably do have a standard wording. I don't have it with me. I'm more than happy to send that through to the DAP Secretariat straight after the meeting, but it will be along those lines.
Okay, I think we'll need to stipulate the exact condition in the resolution. So I would be foreshadowing an amendment to the alternate recommendation to include new condition 15 with the wording that, and I'll get the wording from here because I think it's appropriate to go direct to and to demonstrate management of the car parking provided to the satisfaction of the city. I'll move that.
Catherine also had in her wording prior to commencement of use.
Prior to commencement of the use. Okay. All right. Well, if we do that, I'll move that condition be incorporated as number 15 and all other conditions be renumbered appropriately. Do I have a second? Lindsay seconded. All those in favour? Councillor Pizzing? Well, it's 4. Councillor Pizzing, are you in favour or against the parking management plan?
Oh, no, Paul, sorry.
Okay, all right, then it's unanimous, thank you. All right, well, does anyone wish to speak to the item further, or conditions? If not, Councillor Hill, go ahead.
Yeah, just very briefly, with regard to the alternate, my understanding is that this alternate recommendation was drafted by the city, and during the course of this meeting, there's been interaction with the proponents regarding those conditions, and it seems that these conditions can be acceptable to both the proponent and the city. So, as I said earlier, there's a lot of pros to go against the con of height, and I am very supportive of the development of this type to be at this location. It's important to have these kind of options for residential aged care living within our city. So I'm supporting this alternate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Peter, you wish to speak?
Yeah, sorry. I agree with all the points made. My concern is still that you talk about it's 3.5 levels at the Scarborough site. I'm not sure why this one couldn't have been made 3.5 as well, where residents weren't overlooked on. That is where my concern sits with this particular site.
Okay, thank you. Any further debate on the item? If not, I'll put the item to a vote for the alternate recommendation as amended by including a new condition 15 on the parking management plan. All those in favour? That's 4 against, 1. The item, the alternate recommendation is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, getting back to the items on the agenda. Item 4 under part B, Form 2 development applications. There are none. Item 5, Section 531, SAP recommendations. There are none. Part B, item 1, SAT applications and Supreme Court appeals. So noted. Item 2, general business. There is none. Therefore, I'll close the meeting at 11:13 a.m. Thank you for participating.